During the Roman Empire, one of the core Roman territories was Hispania on the Iberian Peninsula, consisting almost entirely of the modern-day nations of Spain, Portugal, and Andorra. Roman rule in the region lasted for the best part of 600 years, and its effects are still deeply felt today through language, culture, and the presence of countless ancient Roman sites. So in this video, let's explore Roman Hispania, the story of its conquest by the Romans, the geography of the region under Roman rule, and the Roman architecture that we can still see today. And if you do plan to visit the region in the future, perhaps this video can also help orient you to the potential places you can visit. To many of the ancient Mediterranean civilizations further east, the Iberian Peninsula was a distant, mysterious land on the far western edge of the known world. But distance aside, it was also rich in all kinds of natural resources, especially metal ores, and so became a prime target for colonization. The Greeks arrived from the north through their existing colonies in what is now southern France and colonized the eastern coast of the peninsula, especially the region near the mouth of the Ebro River. The Greek name for the region, Iberia, came from the same root as the Ebro. Another maritime people, the Phoenicians, arrived by way of their pre-existing North African colonies and established many trading posts centered around the Guadalquivir River, among which was the port city of Gadir, modern-day Cadiz. Prior to the arrival of the colonists, the region had already been settled by a number of ancient tribes, many of which are now lost to history. In the south and east were the Iberians, who spoke extinct non-Indo-European languages. In the southwest were the Tartessians, who also spoke their own extinct languages. The Tartessians actively traded with the Phoenicians, especially ores like silver and tin. Further inland were the Celtiberians, made up of Celts who had migrated from other parts of Europe, along with more local, Celticized peoples. In the far north and extending into modern-day France were the Aquitani, who gave name to the modern region of Aquitaine in southwestern France, and whose language was a precursor to the modern Basque language. The Phoenician colonies in southern Iberia eventually became dominated by the city of Carthage in North Africa, itself a Phoenician colony. Carthage had a maritime empire of its own, but after being defeated by Rome in the First Punic War from 264 to 241 BC, it was forced out of most of the western Mediterranean. The wounded Carthaginians, under the nobleman and general Hamilcar Barca, shifted their focus to Iberia. Hamilcar conquered large parts of southern Iberia for the Carthaginians and incorporated many Iberians into his army as mercenaries. Hamilcar was killed in 228 BC while campaigning, and his son-in-law, Hasdrubal, took over. Under Hasdrubal, the Carthaginians founded a new city, which the Romans later renamed Carthago Nova, or New Carthage, modern-day Cartagena. After Hasdrubal was assassinated in 221 BC, Hamilcar's now grown-up son, Hannibal, took over. Hannibal continued the Carthaginian expansion into the peninsula, and eventually the Romans became wary of him. In 218 BC, after Hannibal had sacked the pro-Roman city of Saguntum, the Romans declared war, starting the Second Punic War. In some of the most famous events in military history, Hannibal marched an army overland through the Pyrenees and Alps into Italy, soundly defeated the Romans multiple times, including at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, and almost captured Rome itself. But slowly, as the years passed and Hannibal's army got bogged down in Italy, the Romans extended their reach into Iberia. After various failed campaigns in the region, the Romans appointed the general Publius Cornelius Scipio to lead a new campaign. Scipio decisively defeated the Carthaginians at the Battle of Ilipa in 206 BC, after which the Carthaginians were forced out of the peninsula. Scipio followed up this success in 202 BC, when he invaded Carthage itself and handed Hannibal his final defeat at the Battle of Zama. Scipio was awarded the honorific title Africanus. The Carthaginian Empire was no more, and the Romans became the masters of Iberia. The Romans divided the peninsula, which they called Hispania, into two provinces. The first, with its capital at Tarraco, was Hispania Superior, or Nearer Hispania, so named because it was the closer of the two provinces by land to Rome. The second, with its capital at Corduba, modern-day Cordoba, was Hispania Ulterior, or Further Hispania. From these two bases, the Romans set out to expand into the rest of the peninsula. In order to make sense of the rest of the video, it is important that we devote some time to orient ourselves to the general geography of the region, which can be quite difficult to learn, although it doesn't have to be this way. and I will try to simplify it as much as possible. The defining features of the peninsula are its mountains, which generally run parallel to each other because they were mostly formed in relatively recent geological times from the African plate crashing into the European plate, causing furrows to form in the land. There are 5 major rows of these mountains. The first row, in the far north, consists of the Pyrenees that separate the peninsula from the rest of Europe, and their western extension, the Cantabrian Mountains along the northern coast of Spain. Next is a mountain range collectively named the Central System, although its peaks are better known by their local names, such as the Sierra de Guadarrama immediately north of Madrid, or the Serra da Estrela that mark the highest point in continental Portugal. After this are 3 more rows of mountains, the Toledo Mountains, the Sierra Morena, and finally, overlooking the southern coast of Spain, the Baetic Mountains. One additional mountain range, the Iberian System, runs somewhat perpendicular to the Central System. These mountains, in turn, subdivide the peninsula into multiple river basins. We have already covered 2 of these rivers, the Ebro and the Guadalquivir. They empty into or near the Mediterranean, and so were easily colonized by Mediterranean-based powers. 3 more major rivers flow westward into the Atlantic. The Douro River, between the Cantabrian Mountains and the Central System and flowing into the Atlantic at the modern-day city of Porto. The Tagus River, between the Central System and the Toledo Mountains and flowing into the Atlantic at Lisbon. And the Guadiana River, between the Toledo Mountains and the Sierra Morena, with its lower stretch forming part of the border between Spain and Portugal. The basins of these 5 rivers make up most of the peninsula. Although these rivers tend to be poorly suited for navigation, the Romans were still able to expand into the peninsula along their valleys. The interplay between the mountains, rivers, and surrounding ocean currents create 3 distinct climate zones in the peninsula. This is of course a generalization, and there are many microclimates throughout the region, but it's still helpful to think of it in terms of these general zones. The far north, sandwiched between the Atlantic and the rugged Cantabrian Mountains, is cold, wet, and green. The coastal regions in the west and south have Mediterranean climates with sunny beaches and fairly fertile soils. The majority of the peninsula, separated from the ocean by mountains on all sides, is a windswept, arid plateau. But to the Romans, what the interior lacked in terms of agricultural resources, it more than made up for with mineral wealth, especially gold and silver. The native tribes initially tolerated Roman intrusion into their lands, although with time they became more resistant. In 197 BC, the Iberian tribes on the coast rebelled, although it was easily crushed by the Romans. Further inland, the Celtiberian tribes put up much stronger resistance against the Romans, and the 2 sides fought each other on and off for the next 60 years. Some of the most powerful of the Celtiberians were the Lusitanian people, based largely out of modern-day Portugal. They handed the Roman multiple heavy defeats until eventually the Roman generals sued for peace. But this was a trap, and in 152 BC, as the Lusitanians gathered to accept the peace offerings from the Romans, they were ambushed and massacred. One of the few Lusitanians to escape was a shepherd named Viriathus, who swore revenge. Viriathus soon became the new leader of the Lusitanians and led his people on guerrilla campaigns against the Romans, winning many victories in the process. To subdue Viriathus, the Romans again resorted to treachery. They held peace negotiations with the Lusitanians, during which Viriathus sent 3 of his most trusted commanders to negotiate with the Roman general. The Roman general secretly promised those 3 commanders a large sum of money for them to betray Viriathus, who was then murdered in his sleep. According to popular legend, when the 3 assassins then asked the Romans for their prize money, they were told that Rome does not pay traitors, and executed. The Lusitanian resistance gradually fell apart after the death of Viriathus, and the Romans eventually conquered the region for good. Viriathus is now considered one of the great national heroes of Portugal. Outside of the Lusitanians, the Romans also faced significant resistance from other Celtiberian tribes, especially those from the city of Numantia on the Douro River. The city revolted multiple times in the 150s and 140s BC, until the Romans finally had enough and sent one of their top generals, Scipio Aemilianus Africanus, to pacify the city. He raised a large army against Numantia in 134 BC, and taking advantage of Roman engineering skills, built an entire outer wall around Numantia to starve the city. The defenders offered to surrender in exchange for their freedom, but Scipio refused. They began to run out of food, cannibalism ensued, and many defenders committed suicide. Finally, the remaining defenders set the city on fire and then surrendered to the Romans, who then completely leveled what was left of Numantia. After the fall of Numantia, almost all of Hispania fell under Roman rule. The Romans established many colonies in the region, and the local population gradually Romanized. The mountainous far north remained independent for another century, until Augustus, the first Roman emperor, launched invasions against the mountain tribes living there, the Cantabri in modern-day Cantabria, and the Astures in modern-day Asturias. The ensuing wars, known as the Cantabrian Wars, lasted from 29 BC to 19 BC, with the mountain tribes again resorting to guerrilla warfare against the invaders. The wars were extremely brutal. The Romans took no prisoners, and the defenders often chose to commit suicide rather than surrender anyway. Even after the war ended, the region still frequently rebelled against Roman rule, and 3 Roman legions had to be stationed in the area to maintain peace. As the region slowly assimilated under Roman rule in the late 1st century AD, the 3 legions were eventually reduced to only 1 legion. The city that developed around the legionary camp was named Legio, and it gave name to the Spanish city and the medieval Spanish kingdom of Leon. Under Augustus, the 2 pre-existing provinces in the peninsula were reorganized into 3 provinces: Hispania Tarraconensis, Hispania Baetica, and Lusitania. Tarraconensis was by far the largest of the 3 provinces, in part because it consolidated under the leadership of a single governor the 2 most important roles that Augustus needed a governor in Hispania to fulfill: ensuring that its mineral riches were successfully delivered to Rome, and maintaining the loyalty of the legions guarding these mineral riches. For these reasons, Tarraconensis was classified as an imperial province, in that the governors were appointed directly by the emperor in order to ensure their loyalty. The most significant mines in Tarraconensis were located in the north, especially modern-day Galicia in northwestern Spain. The main Roman city in this region, Lucus Augusti, became modern-day Lugo, famous for its well-preserved Roman walls. The gold and tin mined around Lugo were sent to the nearby port city of Brigantium and exported to the rest of the empire. Brigantium became modern-day A Coruña, where the Roman lighthouse, the oldest still continuously in use today, is now one of many Roman UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Spain. The most famous mine in Tarraconensis was the gold mine at Las Medulas, the largest in the empire. Starting in the second half of the 1st century AD, the Romans utilized hydraulic mining techniques in which they dug deep tunnels into the mountains and then quickly filled the tunnels with water, so that eventually the water pressures will wash away the bedrocks to expose the ores. This mine remained productive for over 250 years, and the water mining caused the mountains in the region to collapse, leading to the strange landscape we see today. Besides the gold and tin mines in the north, Tarraconensis also has significant mines in the Sierra Morena that produce silver along with byproducts like lead and mercury. The Romans very much worked many of the natives to death as slaves in the mines. In a sad irony of history, the descendants of these subjugated peoples will in turn do the same thing 15 centuries later to the Native Americans in the mines of Mexico, Peru, and Bolivia. Tarraconensis was named after its capital at Tarraco, modern-day Tarragona. It was a major city in Roman times, but its role as a premier city in the region has long been replaced by Barcelona, an hour to the north by train. Nonetheless, it preserves some incredible Roman ruins, including an amphitheater and an aqueduct which, at least when I visited in 2016, I was allowed to walk on. To the west of Tarragona, at the intersection of the main road and the Ebro River, was the city of Caesar Augusta. The Roman emperors really liked naming cities after themselves, which became Zaragoza. From Zaragoza, the main Roman road continued along the valley of the Ebro River, including the modern-day Rioja wine region, already producing wine for hung-over Roman soldiers back then, and then through the barren landscapes of northern Spain, past Leon, past Lugo, all the way to the Atlantic. This route is now a portion of the popular Camino de Santiago pilgrimage road, although a lot less exciting to hike on than the scenic mountain roads further north. One more Roman city to point out in this region was Segovia, which has one of the largest, best-preserved Roman aqueducts in existence. Tarraconensis had 2 more noteworthy roads. One road ran southwest from Zaragoza and crossed the Tagus River at Toledo, modern-day Toledo, on a bridge that is still standing today, although the rest of the city is now much more famous for its later medieval buildings. Another road followed the coastline south from Tarraco to Sagunto and Valentia, modern-day Valencia, and then to Cartagena, from which the road and our narrative entered the neighboring province of Hispania Baetica. Hispania Baetica, or simply Baetica, was much smaller than Tarraconensis and centered around the Guadalquivir River, known to the Romans as the Baetis River. It mostly corresponds to the modern-day Spanish region of Andalusia. The key Roman export here was olive oil, and to this day Andalusia remains the #1 olive oil producing region in the world, with nowhere else on the planet even remotely coming close. Other major products included grains, wine, and garum, a fermented fish sauce that was a key ingredient in the Roman diet. The port cities in Baetica produced some of the best garums in the empire. Southwestern Baetica also has significant mines that remain active to this day, and the local river that flows through this area, Rio Tinto, has long been famous for the reddish color of its waters due to dissolved minerals and pollution. Baetica was densely settled and heavily urbanized. Its capital was Cordoba, better known today as one of the capitals of Moorish Spain. The Roman bridge across the Guadalquivir remains a major symbol of the city and is still used today. Another location in the city to find Roman ruins is the Mesquita itself, since many of its interior columns were clearly scavenged from earlier Roman buildings. Downstream from Cordoba was Hispalis, modern-day Seville, and the neighboring town of Italica, now a suburb of Seville and the site of multiple Roman ruins, including an amphitheater where the dragon pit scenes from Game of Thrones were filmed. And finally, on the coast was the major port city of Cadiz. The main road from Cartagena took a bend northward across the Baetic Mountains into the Guadalquivir Valley, then passed through Cordoba and Seville all the way to Cadiz. Baetica was one of the most Romanized regions in the empire outside of Italy, and as early as the 1st century AD, many of its elites were already prominent in Roman politics. Unlike Tarraconensis, it was a senatorial province, in that its governors were appointed by the Roman Senate rather than the emperors. Trajan, one of the greatest Roman emperors, was born in Italica, where he also likely spent a significant portion of his youth. He was succeeded by his nephew Hadrian, who also came from Italica but liked to tell people that he was from Rome itself. The reigns of Trajan and Hadrian marked the peak of the Roman Empire. In addition to the two emperors, the politician and philosopher Seneca, who wrote some of the most influential works in Stoicism, also came from this province, in Cordoba. The last of the three traditional Roman provinces in Hispania was Lusitania, named after the Lusitanians mentioned earlier in this video. It roughly corresponds to modern-day Portugal, and the name Lusitania is still frequently used today as an alternative name for the country. As an aside, the ship RMS Lusitania, which the Germans sunk early on in World War I, was named after this province, and it even had a sister named the RMS Mauretania, after the nearby Roman province in what is now Morocco. Major cities in Lusitania included Olisipo, now Lisbon. The capital of Lusitania, though, was much further inland at Augusta and Merida, now the small city of Merida in remote southwestern Spain. It was established as a colony for retired Roman soldiers and was strategically located on the Guadiana River as a major transportation hub connected to Lisbon, Seville, Cordoba, Toledo, and the mines of Galicia. Merida still has some of the most impressive Roman ruins in existence, including the bridge and the Roman theater, both of which are still in use today, although its remote location does make it quite out of the way to visit. Like other parts of the peninsula, Lusitania too was rich in mining, agriculture, and garum. It also played an important role in transportation. The north-south roads connected many parts of Baetica to Tarraconensis, and the port cities on the Atlantic helped maintain the safety of Roman shipping, whether it was food shipments from Baetica to the front lines of Germania, or gold shipments from Galicia to Rome. One of the three provinces in Hispania, Tarraconensis, also possessed territories outside of Hispania, the Balearic Islands, where beach towns like Ibiza are now located. Before its conquest by the Romans, the islands had been under Carthaginian rule and were famous for its slingers, many of whom served under Hannibal during the Second Punic War. Carthage lost control of the islands after its defeat in the Second Punic War, although the Romans initially did not care enough to control it either, and so it became a bit of a Wild West of the ancient Mediterranean and a haven for pirates. The Romans eventually did annex the islands in 123 BC and established two major settlements, Pollentia, modern-day Alcudia, in the north, and Palma, which is today the largest city in the islands, in the south. The two cities became important stopping points for ships traveling between Hispania and other parts of the empire. The islands, although small, still exported many goods to the rest of the empire, including wheat, fish, and dyes. The Balearic slingers continued to serve with distinction as auxiliaries in Roman armies. As the Roman Empire declined in the 200s and 300s AD, the provinces of Hispania remained far away from the front lines, and as such, generally peaceful and prosperous. In the late 200s, the Emperor Diocletian reorganized the administration of the empire. He carved out 3 additional provinces from the massive province of Tarraconensis to make the region more manageable: Galicia in the northwest, Carthaginiensis in the southeast, and Hispania Baetica for the Balearic Islands. These 6 provinces, in addition to Mauritania Tingitana in North Africa, were organized into a diocese, the Diocese of Hispania, with Augusta Emerita as its capital. This new organization helped the empire as a whole deal with the new challenges it was facing, since the political organization that had worked for the previous several centuries was no longer adequate. Christianity also arrived slowly into the region, initially in only the cities, although by the late 300s all of Hispania was pretty thoroughly Christianized. Hispania did not escape the invasions in the 400s AD that led to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. In 409, various tribes, including the Suebi and the Vandals, invaded. The Roman Emperor invited another tribe, the Visigoths, to come to Hispania and kick the invaders out in exchange for a Roman province for them to settle in. The Visigoths did what they were asked, and all the invading tribes were kicked out of Hispania into North Africa, except for the Suebi, who established themselves in Galicia. The Visigoths, as a reward for their service, were awarded land in what is now southern France to settle in. But as Roman authority further deteriorated in the late 400s, the Visigoths again invaded Hispania, conquered it, and made Toledo their new capital. The Visigoths conquered the Suebi kingdom in the late 500s. The Visigoths did their best to preserve Roman culture in Hispania during the 500s and 600s AD, until they were conquered by the Moors invading from North Africa in the early 700s. Most of the peninsula came under Moorish rule, while the descendants of the Visigoths established Christian kingdoms in the mountainous north. Over the centuries, these Christian kingdoms grew stronger as the Moors became weaker, until the Christian kingdoms conquered the rest of the peninsula through the Reconquista. Through a complex series of wars and political compromises, these Christian kingdoms eventually evolved into modern-day Spain and Portugal. Since the fall of the Roman Empire, many successive peoples have ruled over the peninsula, and with each passing century the memory of Rome has faded a little. But at the same time, the Romans still left significant, indelible influences on the region in almost every aspect of life, including language, religion, economy, and social customs, not to mention having founded almost all of the major cities in the region, with Madrid being the major exception. The land would undoubtedly be much different than it is now had it not been for Roman rule.